Hi, I'm Drew, and I'm an amateur model builder. I'm building a layout in my basement called the White River Line, inspired by the Frisco Railroad in the Ozarks. It was about this time 2 years ago when I had started thinking about building a model railroad. Earlier in the year, it was 2020, and COVID had just hit, I was spending a lot more time at home, and I got back into model building as a way to fill my time. I finished up this Citron project that I had started many years earlier, and I was reminded of how much I enjoyed model building, and just how fun and rewarding it can be to try and make something look realistic. I did a little bit of model railroading in high school, and then a little bit more in my late 20s, so it's always been a dream of mine to build my own model railroad. As I was thinking about this, I started watching YouTube videos, and I found a lot of great inspiration and motivation on YouTube. Most of the videos that I found were experienced model railroaders sharing their expertise and their insight. What I found less of were newbies like myself, people sharing what they're learning as they learn. And I thought this perspective might add to the already great model railroading content on YouTube. I posted my first video in March of 2021. And I'm so grateful for all of you that have joined me in this process as I build my model railroad. I've gotten lots of great feedback, and that's provided more motivation for me. Now, some of you have been following me for quite a while. Some of you have just started to follow me. So what I thought I would do as we approach the end of 2022 is to catch up and see what progress I've made so far on this model railroad. I started this project without much more than a vision and some spare room in my basement. I did have a locomotive that my in-laws gave me for Christmas back in the early 2000s, which I'd weathered. I also had a passenger depot, an Atlas kit, and a ready-mix concrete plant. These were left over from an earlier, abandoned attempt at building a layout. The vision for my railroad was based on my childhood home, the Missouri Ozarks. Springfield, Missouri was the headquarters for the Frisco Railroad until it was purchased by Burlington Northern in 1980. I was pretty young in 1980, so I don't really have any memories of the Frisco while it was running. However, during my childhood, and to this day, you can still find lots of nostalgia for the Frisco in the area. I'm sure many of you rail fans find the same for your preferred road. As for the time frame, I chose the 1930s. I chose this primarily because I like the aesthetics of the era. With this broad vision, I began to do some planning and narrow down the story that my layout will tell and how it will operate. A lot of this is about balance and compromise. I like the freedom of a freelance railroad, but I also want to model prototypical railroad operations. Prototypical railroad operations can also conflict with another goal of mine, a continuous running track plan. Real railroads don't run in loops. In this planning, in addition to operations, I also considered geography, some specific features I wanted on the layout, as well as what industries I wanted. During the design process, I consulted a number of track plans, both online and in print. I even met online with an experienced model railroader I'd met on some forums. Perhaps the best resource was the classic Track Planning for Realistic Operations by John Armstrong. The track plan evolved quite a bit over time, from a basic 4x8 to a walk-in design with balloon loops, and then to my final shelf/walk-in design. When considering where in my basement to put the layout, I was fortunate enough to have some options. As the layout plans evolved, so did my plans for where to put the layout. My family's basement serves as storage for our camping equipment, my home office, and our guest bedroom, and now a train room. But it's a pretty open space, and I was free to move things around a bit. Eventually, I decided to move the guest bed and demo a built-in bookcase in the back area of the basement. Next, I started on my benchwork. After sparking some heated debate online and reading How to Build Model Railroad Benchwork by Lynn Westcott, I decided on L girder construction. It's lightweight, economical, and sturdy. I was even able to repurpose some of the material I had harvested from the demoed bookshelf. For the top of the layout, I used 2-inch foam insulation sheets, rather than cleats and risers, and a plywood sub-road bed. This decision was driven primarily by laziness and my subpar woodworking skills. With the benchwork complete, I got started on laying out my track plan. I covered the top of the layout in butcher paper first. This is my first layout, and I wanted to get some practice drawing my track plan before plotting it out on the phone. Also, due to my inexperience, I wanted to make sure that the plan I created on the computer would translate to the space I've got, so I could make any adjustments I might need. In addition to Armstrong's book that I mentioned earlier, I found Track Work Handbook by Paul Mallory, an invaluable resource in this process. I created a number of cardboard templates of curves, easements, and switches to help me precisely lay out the center lines for my track. Now might be a good time to give you a brief overview of my track plan. Here on the left will be my rail yard for classification and storage. It'll also include an engine service area. At the top, I will transition into a rural area. The main line will rise up and follow a bluff. This spur will descend a bit to service a small town, eventually following the line of the White River and leading off the layout. Here on the right, as the main line curves around, it will cross a bridge over the river and the line below. The right section will contain a commercial downtown area with a few industries and a passenger depot. This will all sit on a plateau. The main line will begin its descent and curve around towards the bottom of the layout. Here it will traverse a lift gate. The peninsula will be an industrial section and will include a lumber yard and a feed mill. After laying out the main line, the yard, and the rural and urban sections, I was relatively happy. For the industrial section, a friend recommended to me that I add a Y to add more operational interest. So, while I mulled over this suggestion, I began to do some track work near the rail yard, a section I was pretty happy with. While doing all this planning, I was also researching what track and turnouts to use. Several of my friends over at the Frisco forums recommended I build my own turnouts. They assured me that I had the skill to pull it off. Heck, they even lent me some fast tracks, tools, and jigs to get started. So, I started out by building a couple of simple number 5 switches. I also did a little reading about hand-laying track in Track Work and Line-Side Details for Your Model Railroad, a compilation of articles published in Model Railroader magazine over the years. This seemed like a fun challenge, so I set about laying down my first bit of hand-laid track to go with my handmade switches. This process includes cutting and staining ties and learning some skills to spike and accurately gauge the rails. It felt like a true accomplishment to run my locomotive on this first section of track. I was ready to jump into track work with both feet, but first I needed to finalize the design of the industrial section and see if I could squeeze in a Y. I experimented a bit with track radii to see what my 280 locomotive would tolerate, and to see how tight my curves would need to be to accommodate a Y. With this information, I completed laying out the track lines for the industrial section. Then I laid down the track here in the peninsula. After that, I was ready to move on to the rail yard. I decided to build the switches for the rail yard all in one piece. Up to this point, I'd only built switches using fast-track jigs, but for this custom work, I needed to use paper templates. Most of the skills and techniques are the same, but it does take a little more attention to detail and getting the gauge correct. I got a little help staining the ties here in the yard. Finally, I added the yard's tangent track. Now, having installed almost 60 feet of hand-laid track, I feel like I'm getting the hang of it. This gets you caught up on the work directly on the layout, but I've also done quite a bit of modeling at the workbench as well. I've built and weathered 3 pieces of rolling stock. Early on, it was this Athearn boxcar, a pretty simple kit. I also took on the challenge of a Tichy train group cement hopper conversion. And finally, a Tichy train group gondola. For now, this is the only rolling stock I have that fits my era, but I've got a few other kits waiting in the wings. In addition to the rolling stock, I've started on a few structures. This grist mill is my first scratch building project. My inspiration for this is the Hammond Mill near Thornfield, Missouri. My second scratch build project was this store, inspired by a structure I found in Chadwick, Missouri, the Terminus of Frisco's Chadwick Flyer. I won first place in a weathering contest for this piece. Both of these pieces will sit in the rural area of my layout. I also took on a couple of Walther's kits. First was this collection of stores in the Merchant Row series, which, unsurprisingly, I'll place in my urban area. Next was this coaling tower, which will be placed in the engine service area near the rail yard. I've also started a kit bass project, a lumber yard and millwork that will be placed in the industrial section. Well, that gets you all caught up. I'm pretty satisfied with the work I've gotten done in the last 21 months, but I'm very aware of all the work I've got left to do, and at times it can feel pretty overwhelming. In the coming months, I'm going to wire the track, build a DCC++ system, install a DCC decoder into my locomotive, and I need to finish up this lumberyard that I've been working on. This coming year, in addition to all of that, I've got some rolling stock, I've got some more structures I need to build, I need to do a little more track work. I'm hoping to build some switch machines out of servo motors using an Arduino to control them. I guess I need to install a backdrop, ballast the track, and hopefully I can get to doing some landscaping. You can find a list of the tools, supplies, and resources I use in the description below, along with links to my Instagram and Facebook account. If you've got any feedback or comments, please leave those below in the comments. I really appreciate all of the encouragement, all of the tips and tricks, and all of the comments that I have gotten over the last couple of years. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for watching, and please join me again next time as I continue modeling the White River Line.